Up next, we have Richmond Wong talking about values by design imaginaries, investigating values work in UX practice.
Great. Thank you. Welcome back from break. I'm Richmond. I'm a PhD candidate here at the iSchool. I work with Deirdre. And today I'm going to talk about some early themes coming out of my dissertation, which focuses on the work practices that user experience professionals at technology companies do in the name of addressing values and ethics. So I'm going to discuss how my interviews with UX professionals inspired a set of speculative designs, which I have used to reflect on and explore some of the politics involved in the work that they tell me about. But I will start with a brief vignette about an encounter that I had with an interviewee. So in December 2018, I was sitting in a coffee shop in San Francisco, centrally located within walking distance of many tech company offices, and I was meeting Francine, which is a pseudonym. Francine works on accessibility as part of a user experience team at a company that creates enterprise business software. In our discussion, Francine began to discuss an incident where she and other coworkers learned that one of their company's client organizations was involved in perpetuating harms against migrant families. And later on, that client organization reached out to ask for help to improve the accessibility of their installation of the software that was made by Francine's company. And Francine and a coworker had very strong feelings against helping this organization because of the harms that they were creating. And so Francine and a coworker drafted a letter that they planned to share more widely, noting how this violated their personal values. And when I asked Francine why they framed it in terms of personal values, Francine noted that they were unsure of how empowered they were in taking these actions. She noted that some other coworkers pushed back, saying that by not helping out this client, they might be harming the client's workers who have disabilities. And while Francine felt that her immediate manager was supportive, the issue got raised to upper management, and Francine recounted the response back from a chief officer of the company as being basically, do your job, and that not working for this client would open a can of worms. What if anyone could stop work based on their personal values? But in the end, management hired an outside contractor to help out this particular client. And Francine had very mixed feelings about this. On one hand, she was glad that she personally didn't have to help out the client organization, but at the same time, she was frustrated that it silenced acknowledgement of the problems that she and her coworkers saw. Their goal wasn't solely about not working for the client, but was also about communicating the concerns they had about potential human rights violations, and that conversation got silenced. And so while the potential magnitude of harm in Francine's situation may be very high compared to other values and ethics issues, many interviewees who I talked to recounted instances when they tried to surface these potential issues, things also involving privacy, accessibility, inclusivity, or more generally preventing harm to users, and how they are often either only partially successful in getting those addressed or sometimes unsuccessful. And so this broader project builds on values and design research, which has studied how social values are implicated in practices of technology design, use, and maintenance. I focus primarily on user experience or UX professionals and the practices they employ in the name of addressing social values issues. So right now, some companies are creating formal roles for addressing values and ethics with positions like chief ethics officers or expanding existing roles like legal compliance to try to consider values and ethical issues. Others have created engineering teams like privacy or security engineering teams to focus on specific values. My work focuses on a different group, UX professionals. With job titles like user researcher, UX designer, or interaction designer, their expertise generally lies in understanding more social aspects of technology use by considering how people may use or interact with systems. And my research focuses specifically on UX professionals who have explicitly tried to think about or address values in relation to their work practices. So my dissertation is asking kind of what happens after UX professionals already see values as relevant to their job and see them as important. How are they then acted upon and addressed or not addressed? And what does doing this kind of values work look like? In addition, coming from a design research background, I make use of speculative design, a reflexive design method that uses design to raise questions by creating conceptual designs rather than focusing on finding design solutions. So here I use speculative design to interrogate the politics of practices discussed by interviewees, and I try to begin to explore maybe some alternative ways that this values work can be done. So next, I will discuss 2 speculative designs I've created through this process and reflect on some of what I've learned. These designs are inspired by issues that my interviewees encountered, and then I kind of take those and push on them a little bit or stretch them out in different ways to surface different discussions about the political dimensions of this work. So one place I wanted to probe was this outsourcing practice that Francine's company ended up using, right? And use design to ask a question, what if addressing ethical issues in products became delegated to outside consulting companies in the same way that legal counsel or design consultancies or other forms of consulting labor are often used in the technology industry today? So this is a fictional website for Anchorton, a fictional but perhaps problematic ethics consulting company. Anchorton provides services that they call e-task auctions, which is an ethical bidding system that matches work tasks with an individual's ethical beliefs through kind of a algorithmic matching system. And they have e-staff contractors, which Anchorton has their own consultants work on projects that companies' in-house employees don't want to do because of their personal beliefs. And so Francine and other interviewee stories inspired Anchorton, which takes that contracting out solution a step further. And it imagines a broader ecosystem of contractors and consultancies to which some responsibility of ethical decision-making gets delegated to. But importantly, Anchorton views ethics to be a property of individuals rather than of groups or institutions. So the ethical auction and matching system basically pits workers against each other to get those who are less concerned about social implications of their work to bid on perhaps more questionable projects. And this kind of individual framing reflects some of the concerns raised by Henry, a senior UX designer, and Isabel, a design consultant. Both of them spoke about leaving previous jobs or declining work offers with tech companies that they thought might be causing harm to end users, but they worried that somebody else with a different set of personal values and beliefs would just take those jobs and do the work instead. And so, even though it helps them, maybe it doesn't help the broader set of problems. The second design is a values and ethics work tracker. Someone can use this tool to track work tasks related to raising discussion and addressing values in the workplace. So each of these squares represents a day. Darker squares indicate more contributions, however we define a contribution, to values and ethics work. And so this is depicting a fictional worker, Jen Starr, and her details for a day where she tracks things like attending a product meeting where she presented a set of user personas around accessibility, but also had to explain ADA accessibility laws to her coworkers, and notes that she got interrupted 3 times by Paul while doing this. Later, she attends a diversity and inclusion lunch where she tried to explain the non-neutrality of platforms multiple times, only to face rolled eyes and another interruption. And so while the issues faced by Francine came from one big interaction around one particular issue, the work of surfacing values can also be part of smaller, ongoing, everyday interactions. And in creating this speculative work tracker, I wanted to ask about and explore what forms of unrecognized labor are involved in doing values work. The grid graphic adopts a visualization used by GitHub, which records technical contributions to a project, but tries to adapt that model of tracking to a different form of work. And so it also begins to ask questions about the politics and implications of making work visible in this way, which could introduce new problems in its own right. This design was also inspired by Laura, who is a UX designer who talked about creating an ethical debt tracker by using bug tracking software. She keeps a list of the times that she wanted to add or change features that had some kind of values or ethical dimension, but was told, we can't do that now, we'll try to incorporate it in a later release. And Laura wants to have this record so that she can bring up those issues again in the future. Relatedly, Nova, who works at an enterprise software company, discussed their involvement in their organization's diversity and inclusion initiatives, but immediately talked about how they're unpaid for that work and how that is very much volunteer labor. And Laura and Nova are both grappling with forms of unrecognized labor that they're doing, and this speculative tracker asks what it might look like if some of that work was recognized in this particular, potentially problematic, quantifiable way. So now I'm going to turn to a couple quick reflections. Researcher Katie Shilton writes about values advocates, a person whose formal job it is to normalize and facilitate discussion of values in technical settings. And in contrast, I think I view these UX professionals as doing kind of that values advocacy work by other means, in the sense that they're trying to do the work of values advocates as part of their everyday technical and professional practices, but are not formally recognized in those roles. A lot of their labor involved in doing this values work has emotional dimensions, and a lot of it goes unrecognized, especially when the results of their work is only partially successful and not necessarily represented in the end user facing product. I also want to quickly reflect on my use of design in this dissertation. A lot of classic speculative design projects tend to look at a specific speculative artifact to question the artifact's politics. In contrast, the designs I presented tonight are used to explore and craft an argument around the social and political aspects of practices, specifically design practices. And so I call these infrastructural speculations, using the lens of design to look at the politics of practices and institutions required to build and support technical artifacts, not just the artifacts themselves. And that's all. Thank you very much, and thank you to colleagues who've helped shape my thinking.
This is amazing. What you've done here is simply amazing. I've been working in diversity in tech for many, many years, and to be able to get to that granularity. Have you seen that a lot of tech companies have been, the ones especially in the CSR that are like Google and others are wanting to have this kind of software, internal software?
You mean like this type of thing?
Yes, where they're actually tracking it, because they're saying that they're working on diversity and inclusion.
Yeah.
This kind of software would really aid in that, where the retention, attraction and retention, and to be able to to really look at the what I'm trying to think of the word that they call it when they're looking at these
So yeah, like,
I'm missing it because later on in the day we've been doing a lot of things, but they've been looking at like how to track this kind of the non-verbals, the things to make inclusion better. Are you seeing that this would be something that they're looking to institute?
maybe not. I mean, in some ways, I have very conflicted feelings about this particular, design in ways that it makes these things visible, but also potentially, makes, whenever we quantify or categorize things, it introduces a set of new questions in politics around, what if people begin doing things, just out of a compliance mechanism, and, whether or not that's actually ethical behavior. At the same time, there are, metrics and, whether it's return on investment or like objectives and key results, and these forms of metrics that do structure a lot of work at tech companies. And I've had interviewees express kind of conflicting ideas about that, where some people are being like, we should try to get, cultural dimensions addressed in some of these, more quantitative metrics. At the same time, like, is that really addressing the issues that I see? And there's a lot of kind of conflicted feelings about how much do we engage in these forms of measurement.
Excellent.
Yeah, I was just interested to hear a little bit more about this kind of notion of making visible, like invisible ethical labor as a project, or as something that came out of your interviews. Just was hoping you could say a little bit more about that.
I mean, sometimes it felt like some of the interviews felt kind of like a release valve for some people, and like the way that I read it, and that like some pent up tensions, and that like talking with me was like helping increase some of the visibility of the work. I think one of the things that, like, part of the broader project is basically for me saying that user experience professionals have a role in these conversations, and some of them are already trying to engage in this work. I think a lot of conversations that we have are often around kind of engineering ethics, around very like technical professions, which like we also need to do, or these kind of top down, we need a chief ethicist at our organization, right? And those are like different forms of practices, different types of knowledge, and that by making this visible, this is kind of an additional set of knowledge and practices that I think would be useful. At the same time, people who engage in these types of things are also, there's been retribution or like firing of people who engage in some of these types of issues too, and so there's lots of tensions there. Thanks.